Pokemon games have gotten the remake treatment for a while now, while fan creations have been left in the dust. So to tackle this issue, in this compilation I'll attempt to remake iconic ROM hacks to see how they would look like today. Back in the day, Pokemon Snakewood was one of, if not the most infamous Pokemon ROM hack. But with amazing new ROMs coming out in recent time, how well could Snakewood look today? I'll choose some of the designs, remake them in a new style, and by the end of the video we'll find out the result. Starting simple before delving into chaos, let's take a look at Rock Lobster. A definition of don't judge a book by its cover, Rock Lobster has a base stat total of 645, while being a Dragon Rock type. And while we're here, let's also take a look at its Pokédex entry, which goes as follows. We were at the beach, everybody had matching towels. Somebody went under a dock, then they saw a rock. But it wasn't a rock, it was a rock lobster. After some simple research, turns out this fella is based on the group B-52's song Rock Lobster. Pretty neat. Now that we got that out of the way though, let's redesign it in the Gen 5 style. Grabbing the original sprite to be as reference on the side, I start mapping out and creating a prototype for Rock Lobster's new design by making the perspective be very similar to how sprites usually are in the Unova games. Getting the perspective and an idea of how the design could end up looking, I get to adding in the colors, for which I take the ones in the original sprite and remix them to be with less saturation and being more balanced. After I split up the design in separated layers for easier animating further on, I get to applying lighting to the sprite, which starts to bring the whole design together. With color outlines applied, I dive straight into the animating process, which after creating a smooth, pleasant loop and some adjustments right after it, we can finally see how it would work in a newer game. Now that we got that out of the way, time to spice it up a bit. To make this more intriguing, for our next remake, let's do the mascot of the ROM hack, which is the alternate form of Muck. Yuck! Even though the game is initially heavily focused on zombie Pokemon, Yuck is only one of two evolution lines that are catchable in the game. As for typing, Yuck is a poison and the new disease type, which essentially just replaces the question mark type and has no weaknesses or resistances, while hitting every other typing for only neutral damage. Yuck has a base stat total of 520, but let's see what the Pokédex entry has to say. A creature composed only of the mingled blood of mucks and humans. Yuck eats as many people as it can to replenish its body, which it leaves behind it in a trail. Well, that's edgy 2010's ROM hacks for you. Now, time to get it remade. Sticking the original to the side and getting some of the sprites for Muck as reference, I start out by making a sketch of the new design, move everything around till it starts to look competent, rework the kid's disembodied head aspect, and turn it into a lure-like trap, which it accomplishes by blood magic or something. Alolan Muck has an ability called Power of Alchemy, so you can pull off some reaches with that concept, I guess. Some satisfying color filling in later, I also start making patterns similar to newer Muck and original Yuck. Play around with how the shading could work until I get a good outcome, make the outlines better, and boom! Time for animation. But before that, I make the canvas a bit bigger to have more space for animating, since, well, the sprite size got a bit out of hand. Oops. Almost an hour later, The animation and sprite itself is done. Time for results. Before getting to even more crazy, ridiculous old school designs, let's get the final semi-normal design done, except yuck. Hopefully, it doesn't turn out to be anything bad, but Gosu Bowel looks like a pretty neat design for something in a ROM hack like this. Its typing is Ghost Dark, base stat total is 462, but most interesting is the fact that you apparently can't find it in the game. Nor does it have a real dex entry, the only text being Error 623. Creature is not a Pokemon. This intrigued me quite a bit, so after seeing its species be called the Denju Pokemon, after a single search I learned that this design is from a Game Boy Color game called Ketai Denju Telefang, which is a monster collecting RPG game. And is also the origin of our pal Gosubua here, even being a straight one-to-one copy. Didn't expect to find some intriguing trivia about this ROM hack, but time to turn this into a more original design for Snakewood. As you already know, I start out with the OG one as reference, creating an outline, sketch it out until I get results that looks good enough to continue working on. Changing up the colors to be more different and give it more of a Ghost Dark type vibe, I color the sprite and apply lighting to make it look more like a cloth. Extra polish and coloring outline later, I move on to the animation, for which I go with, of course, ghostly movement. Phasing in as a finished Gen 5 sprite, let's take a closer look. Before closing off with a literal abomination, let's move on to the Fakemon Face Leech. Although clearly put together with parts from the Oxys, let's check it out before remaking it as an original design. Being a disease and poison type with a bizarre stat spread, that's 434 in total, finally let's see the Pokédex entry. It's a leechy sort of thing that sucks your face off. Really fast. Oh, and by the way, congratulations for discovering how to get it. If you're confused about the last part, it points to the fact that you need to breed a separate Fakemon called Turmur to get it, which without previous knowledge is pretty much impossible to find out yourself. To be honest, I easily had the most fun creating and animating this sprite out of all these horrid creatures. Well, that's mostly because it's a very simple design, but animating it was also quite fun due to it taking less time to fix each frame. As for the redesign itself, I went with a more dynamic pose to play into the fact that it ends up being animated. But also, I decided to mostly keep the exact same colors as the original, since you rarely get to see poison types other than the usual purple. Oh, and I guess you could say using some parts from Deoxys myself could play a part in it. As for the previously promised abomination, meet the ugly jumbled mess, which is literally called a monster, yet has Q-Charm as its only ability. Props to the devs for that one. Rocking a menacing 830 base stat total, clearly this thing is meant to be solely used for a boss fight. At least I think so. It's not available anywhere in the ROM hack, nor does it have a meaningful dex entry, except a line that reads, "This is horrible, just awful." Ugh. Well, time to make it something more than a stitched together mess of Gen 3 sprites. When thinking of a way to make it more unique, I go for a similar concept like Garbodor, but instead of random trash pieces, I stitch together and blend multiple aspects of Pokemon that appear in the original sprite to put together a design that features unique or noticeable things from each Pokemon, hence ending up with a result that not only consists of original concept while still having existing sprite components, but also it's a whole new Fakemon compared to the original monster. Oh, and I made the animation to be mostly just struggling with movement, since, well, can you imagine this thing trying to move around, while every other part has independent of other limbs itself? Yeah, pretty crazy.
So, to keep it short, a video I made a good while ago that was about me remaking Snakewood's designs decided to see how the extrovert life looks like, and ended up hitting 100k views quite quickly. Game flooded with multiple comments asking for more, and getting attracted like a fly to shit for a good video topic, I just left the decision for the next one to you, for which we ended up with Pokemon Sweet. Man, I love democracy. Anyways, let's get straight to it. Okay, I get the thing you're going to do, but what the hell even is Pokemon Sweet? I hear a person conveniently saying to get the video moving. To answer any like-minded people's thoughts and build up to the main event, let's quickly go over the ROM hack's history. Pokemon Sweet is a ROM hack that was developed by Eframe225 and helped by Chanini, which was released on July 27, 2014, and gave the fanbase a whole new take on the stereotypical Pokemon adventure. Like its name suggests, Pokemon Sweet presents us a multitude of various mechanics and features, which of course are related to various tasty foods being inspirations for a whole new type chart, reimagined Pokemon with candy-based designs and taking on the name of Poke-Sweets instead, while having all of this take place in a location that has diabetes the word of the week all the time. Now, although the game clearly still has a lot of Fire Red elements in the game, with things like the overall map layout and some Poke-Sweets being clearly barely changed, but still having 150 new designs and completely new types to play around with was more than enough to provide enough entertainment for players, hence solidifying itself as one of the best hacks at its time, only to go a step above for its sequel with 386 total Poke-Sweets, Megas, and overall higher quality. But that's for another day. So let's roll back to the first entry we got and finally get a taste of this video's main gimmick. I'll take the mascot, then randomly select 4 other Fakemon from the roster, just like I did for Snakewood, and remake them. And to make this that much more special, I'll put the redesigns back into the actual ROM, which will give us an opportunity to get a glance at a full remake. On that note, let's begin this chapter with deciding on which Poke-Sweets to remake with a method that can be easily compared to throwing darts, while being biased and semi-blindfolded. Don't ask me how that works. We're starting out with Mawile and a Banana's offspring as a warm-up, or rather an entree for the other sweets, until we hit the big boy on the title screen. So let's finally take a quick peek at Monana and learn a bit more about it. Like you probably couldn't guess, Its type and ability is banana. Ability-wise, no clue what that means. Type-wise, it's strong against lemon and lime, but weak against apples, oranges, and lemons. Which, out of context, sounds weirdly hilarious. Moving on to stats, surprisingly enough, Monana actually has quite a tweaked base stat total compared to the original. In this case, having plus 20 total stat points, though objectively having a much worse stat spread in comparison. Last but not least, we can't forget about the Pokédex equivalent for this hack, which for today will be the cleverly called Cookbook. Monana's entry reads as follows. Its banana hair has a number of applications. It is a cannon, mouth, and even a helicopter all at once. Who knew a banana could act as a Swiss knife if you use it correctly? Anyways, with that now out of the way, let's get to actually remaking it. Messing around with the proportions of the body and pose until getting a satisfying result, while expanding on the banana concept, I quickly move on to getting the coloring in process done to have an easier time of identifying any parts of the sprite that would need fixing, which allows me to apply details much more freely. Closing off with an exercise in separating all the moving parts to make the animating process much easier for myself, I end off with doing exactly that. And before I reveal the final Gen 5 version, let's actually encounter and witness the fake Mon in its origin game with a fresh coat of paint. With that being said, who wants to see its final form? Although it's nothing close to the mighty beast that we'll see later on in the video, I would say that this still turned out pretty well. But now that we're familiarized with the process, let's begin moving faster, starting with... Wasting no time, let's jump into the coverage of the outdated meme-sounding Pokesweet Leganium. Rocking a sweet combo of raspberry and lime, while having an anticlimactic chlorophyll as the ability. Moving on to compare the stats with the vanilla version, pun intended, Leganium has the same total, yet a different stat spread that focuses more on bulkier HP special offense, instead of a defensive tank build. Turning to the lore aspect, let's see what the cookbook entry has to say for us. Licorice flowers grow on its back. These are said to be the sweetest plants ever grown. Licorice and sweet are the two things I thought I would never hear in the same sentence, yet here we are. So, time to see what now we can cook up in the design department. Seeing how its pre-evolution is more based on the red licorice string type of candy, I thought I could play it safe and switch it up a bit at the same time. So let's give going the same route as Leaforest a shot. Beginning with a sketch that heavily resembles Meganium, only to swiftly start straying away from that exact design, I start incorporating more and more of the red licorice in locations that have a big role in Meganium's design, like the flower and antennas. Then finally apply colors to actually showcasing them being the specifically mentioned type of candy. Applying the personally most satisfying details of minor color tweaks, outlines and shadows, the sprite is finally done after an animating process you get to skip. Already at the ROM revisiting segment, let's see how it actually looks in-game. Now, not only does it look more original compared to the initial one, but it also fits the line much better, which I'm sure the animated sprite can back up for me. Okay, I think I'm starting finally to understand what they meant with the licorice and sweetness comment before. But I'm sure it gets more delightful the further we go. Probably going to be the one that makes me hungry is the most. Slugnut is one that's changed the most on the data side of the design. This time running only a mono grape type and single ability that doesn't even match any of the previous ones, while evolving 16 entire levels sooner than its Lava Oreo counterpart. Shit, this actually got me hungry. Only to have 20 more stat points over the regular definitely makes me think that this is tuned the most on this side of the field. Unless Morlax has something to say about that? Well, we have to wait and see until we get to that one. But let's get back to the donut at hand. Before the actual redesign, let's read what the label says for this off-putting donut. Its donut is filled with delicious jelly. Makes for a relaxing, tasty ride, if a rather slow ride. Very gooey. Alright, I think I'll keep the questions to myself and instead just get to the spriting process. Thinking there's no other perfect thing to implement into the design other than probably the most iconic donut, which is the one you almost always see Homer Simpson eating, time to make Slugnut much more special. Starting with the already repetitive sentence of mentioning the sprite proportions, I make sure to add in a bite from the donut to tie the whole thing together and start filling colors, while desperately trying to make it not look like the donut is dipped in sentient chewed up bubblegum, which was probably not a problem up until this point. My bad. Detailing the main point of the sprite by trying to get as many sprinkle colors as possible from what I can due to a 16 color palette limit, I close off this segment with some last touches and mentioning the animating segment skip. Without further ado, say hi to the redesigned Slugnut in its original habitat. Though let me do one better for you. And just like that, hunger has struck again. Let's move on before I eat something I'll regret. Seeming as a pretty simple design at first, which is only so late in this video because of the unsuspectedly great redesign I ended up making for this trick-or-treater. Pumpkinette is a surprise sleeper hit that I'm sure you'll end up liking as much as I do after its dedicated segment. But to actually reach that point, let's see what it itself actually offers. Jumping into the summary part of this fake mode, we quickly can start to see signs that this version of Banette is actually inferior compared to the original. More specifically, Runaway is easily worse than any of Banette's possible abilities. The base stats not only have a lower stat total, but also has a worse stat distribution. And worst of all, its growth rate is a whole stage worse. How could they? But before we pull out all of our hair about this injustice, let's cover the cookbook entry before the remake. It has the power to grow by giving its foes a good fright. Fear is its power source. Its maximum size is unknown. The amount of restraint I need to not make a dick joke right now is insane. Let's just grow. Fuck. Messing around with the size of its head, oh god damn it. I create the rest of the body while using the regular bonnet as a crutch, only to eventually stray away from the colors and other main design aspects like the mouth zipper that bonnet has to come up with, aspects that combines the original Pumpkinhead spear-based factor, while also adding in candy corns to keep that Pokemon sweet theme intact, playing around with the colors to give it a homegrown and candy-based pumpkin feel at the same time. Eventually, I get to a point where everything just comes together nicely, and finally gets made after some good old animating. Time to see the results in its hometown. Well, isn't that awesome? Call me biased all you want, but this goes harder than all those dick jokes I avoided. Well, fuck. Great, now my memory of this remake is tainted by bad dick jokes. Let's just move on to the main star of the show instead. Finally getting to the one that you probably got tired of me teasing by this point, it's time to see and learn about that guy on the digital box art. Now, although its stat total takes a major drop from Snorlax's 540 stat total to a pitiful 400, our marshmallow-bodied friend here is not a mono-typed Pokemon, but instead rocks a duo of chocolate and vanilla for its typing, for which both have interesting properties in battle, in the result being weak only to chocolate, while also being weak to the exact same thing. Alright, it gets wackier type properties wise instead of a better and more balanced stat distribution. But what else makes it that special? Besides having its battle prowess having been paid for with exposure on the game's cover, instead of actual pay in stat points, dude's constantly on the grind. Its body is a thick gooey mass of marshmallow coated in rich chocolate. It never stops adding to its mass. Well, I guess just star power is enough to make you the center point of a video, huh? Or the redesign is just that good? Well, time to find out. Having an asymmetrical idea at first with Snorlax being a large melted marshmallow abomination on a stick at first, eventually I ended up making it much more symmetrical and made the stick a literal centerpiece. Then incorporated all of the other Snorlax's main design attributes in a way that makes sense for a s'more design, eventually stumbling on the perfect colors to trigger drooling yet again. Then finally showcased Snorlax's actual marshmallow properties by making it stretchy and wobbly in the animation. After actually getting you to take a look at me animating the sprite, here's the final result of the last Pokesuite that's remade and in their original game. But we cannot conclude the video without... So just like that, we're finally done here. Pokemon Quartz, an honest attempt at being yet another Pokemon ROM that could be remembered as an all-time classic in the community. Did it achieve this goal? Well, let's just say that it's popular for the wrong reasons. But hey, it got you to click on this video. If you've seen either of the two previous episodes in this series, you would already know how this will go down. As for anyone new, time to listen up and start the clock. I'll start by going over a quick history of the ROM in the spotlight, take 5 Pokemon and go over them as well, then remake their designs and shinies, only to end with adding them back into the ROM to see how they would look with a fresh coat of paint. Got all that? Great, because we're jumping straight in. Pokemon Quartz was first released on Poke Community back in March 23, 2006, which was posted by a user called Tech Barrow, or just Barrow for short. In the hack that was made by using Pokemon Ruby as the base, Quartz features almost 400 new designs, the new corner region being quirky with having not 8, not 16, but 9 whole new gyms, with a new story to follow along that as well. To quickly summarize the plot, the story starts in the corner region, having just moved there. Professor Barrow, aka Self-Insert, sends you off with a Pokédex cliché to fulfill, while having yet another brain-dead organization that somehow has always more people joining than there are people in all of the cities. Well, what's their daring deed today, you say? The electric-themed evil organization by the name of Band Ambar aims to harness the power of the sun to bolster electric-type Pokemon. That has to be the stupidest plot I've... You were saying? So yeah, besides the expected part of stopping them and beating the league, pretty cookie cutter if I do say so myself. Then again, it doesn't matter that much as long as the main focus, rather the Pokemon themselves, are cool enough to... What's the opposite of flying too close to the sun? Before I burn my eyes out, let's just get to me having my hardest redesign challenge yet. Thinking I'm so clever and quirky, let's start with a starter. How do I even have an audience? Not even having a page for most of the Fakemon, I had to dig into the game's code and, oh no, play through the game a bit to actually find information on every design in this video. Even for the somehow capable of learning a tract, Third Goblin Babos. Being the final stage in a line, the Monograss Giardino has a stat total of 530, being somehow faster than a Pokemon that's literally based on a jet. But then again, that same thing is outsped by a fat cat that most usually forget about, so scratch that. As for how it looks in-game, the most surprising thing about all its sprites is that the back looks much higher quality than the whole roster itself. But otherwise, it's nothing special. As for Pokédex entries, we got that as well, though in broken English. I would correct it for you, but that would just ruin the experience. Giardino's head is so big that its brain has to be really little, so it won't lose its balance. Don't ask me how that works, cause by this, Giardino is known by its little intelligence. Huh, wasn't that a journey and a half itself to go through? Well, time to recharge our brain cells with finally getting to redesign the creature. Deciding to try and give its hippo heritage a better showing, I lean more into its real-life animal counterpart side of the design to make it more chunkier, rounder, and special. How would this thing be 120 speed stat points fast? checkmate. Growing the other attributes along the size growth to not make them seem out of place, I shaped the leaves to be more arm-like, so that the thing can be imagined as actually being capable of surviving in a wildlife scenario. Finishing up all the things related to sprite designing as well, I also do a little bit of unnecessary enhancing by also creating an icon that follows the Gen 3 style, while also letting the YouTube comments voices be heard, with the fact that back sprites have also made an appearance. Yippee! With a full package now made, let's turn back to the ROM and witness the glow up in action. Dummy fig? Check. Dummy fig from the back? Check. An icon that's just there? No. How about an icon that's just there while looking dummy fig? Check. Also, we can't forget about some good old shiny action, which slowly leads into... If you thought that was fun, wait until you see what's up next. We can't have a ROM design remake video without an RNG element, so let me just... yeah, that should be good. Being a 13-year precursor for Dynamaxes, the Fakemon that I'll probably pronounce each time differently, Descomune fills the role for the random category of today's batch. What are the other categories, you may say? I'll guess you need to watch until then to find out. So let's get moving. Being the final evolution in its line, and having a 500 stat total with a spread, that would be any Pokemon designer's sleep paralysis demon. Its other ventures like the ability and type side don't fare much better either. But when it comes to the sprites, the most I can say besides the funny thing about there being no difference in the shiny back sprite is that I love the simplicity with its icon animation and circling mist at the top. Alright, enough joking around. Time to see what tales the Dex has prepped for us. Older Descumunes are really big. Although only the 10% of its body is meat, its back rock grows really fast. It's so big, dig joke, that in Descomune's tops it often snows. Okay, I think I'll prefer not speaking about how much takes it took to record that. But also, I can't hate on a fellow non-native English speaker, so I'll keep my script reading only mouth shut. Instead, it's time to get down to business. Liking the concept, yet feeling like it definitely has things that could be improved, I keep the same idea of the Fakemon and either enhance the things that I think work well, or change aspects like the head and fin shape to mesh better with the overall image of the design. Though if you asked me what was the worst thing about retouching this beast, that still loses to your mom when it comes to the biggest islands when entering the waters, is the struggle of not making the mountain too messed up when animating. So to solve that, I painstakingly adjusted every frame in an attempt to avoid any weird morphing when moving. But when it comes to the end result, I would say that it paid off pretty well, even with the back sprite, menu sprite, and shiny variants in mind. Though there's something still missing. Oh, thanks for reminding future me. Now, how about you do the transition for me as well, eh? Eh? Slipping past any King DDD relation allegations, Rui Cantor joins us as the Route 1 bird equivalent for Quartz. As for the slot it fulfills in this video's roster, let's see... It kind of looks cool? Yeah, let's go with that. After avoiding unnecessary bullshit, we get to see that our regal bird here is eating shit in every regard besides speed. And yes, this is the final stage in its evolution line. That's, of course, normal flying. Not offering much else in the stat department besides a mildly intriguing guts ability, Rui Cantor instead shows off with above average sprites when compared to the competition. But before we get to make sprites of our own, let's get to the segment that you forgot you were excited for. Rui Cantor's sinking voice reminds two opera singers. The way this Pokemon some scientists think, Rui Cantors are able to learn humans' language, or at least repeat words with no sense, as a parrot. Okay, I'm sorry. That was almost a KO and a half right to the brain. But we can't quit just yet. Deciding that leaning more into the regal and showing off aspect could be a better fit for the design, and not having any funny haha ideas about it looking slightly similar to a different Birking, I give Rui Cantor's red-colored feathers a new look, which grow out to give a look that's similar to royalties and their attire, while still not just being a case of, ew, the Pokemon is wearing clothes. As for the so-called crown, I make it a version of crown-like shapes that some birds like the cassowary have, which are called casquets, I think. Hence having not only a realistic excuse, but also having a play with words. As for some extra charm, I gave the loop-breaking animation some extra flair by making it exude smug energy with a shoulder-cleaning swipe that arrogant, proud royal stereotypes usually have. While I feel pretty proud of my reasonings for design aspects of the new Rui Cantor, here are most of the sprites that reinvigorate this long untouched Fakemon. As for showing off all of the sprites, with that out of the way, how about we finally cover an actual higher level design? Just like we can't have a redesign video without RNG, we also can't have a ROM remake video without its guy on the title screen. After not making a joke about it being a stand-in for Rayquaza, yet still saying indirectly, Kawasune comes at us with stats that end up just mildly reinforcing my last statement. But the Fire Dragon typing makes me intrigued, especially with that ability. Giving it the benefit of doubt, the sprites offer some unique properties like the green Kyogre fin-like markings on its forehead. Nonetheless, let's see if this legendary has any special lore. Kawasune has been described in mythology as the firing chaos incarnation that would destroy the world. This Pokemon's fury is nothing compared to the Master of Chaos. If we look a bit deeper, in my case just clicking on its fandom page, the term Master of Chaos refers to another legendary by the name of Garotao, also known as Deoxys' fat mustache-twirling uncle. Alright, enough yapping. Let's give this Rayquaza-inspired design a second coat of paint, making it more intimidating and slivery to show off its spiky design elements. While coming off more bigger in size, I start playing more into its Chaos Prophet aspect with colors and artistic choices that make it seem more venomous, while also not overdoing it since it's not the top dog, so to speak, hence making it seem more like a henchman as how it's described in Garotao's dex entry. With more edge made in the animation process, let's bring it back to its homeworld and finally not bring up the topic of identity crisis. But even with all these mesmerizing pixels on screen, we haven't reached the peak until we... Want to know something cool? There's still one more chapter left. Most likely being the thing that introduced you to this ROM hack in the first place, Babos, without any better words to describe it, is a masterpiece that's severely undercut by its presentation. Do I really mean it? No. Do I want to make it sound like that and have the funniest time thinking that this is the one many remember this ROM hack by? Yes, I do. Although this accidental ironic 10 out of 10 has an evolution called Osoe, I'll stick to just going over the one that has actual meme status behind it instead. Probably being only a surprise to the -1 Babos fanbase only, it wields a majestic stat total of 260 with a nothing burger of a stat spread at the expected normal type on top. Like I mentioned before, it evolves into a Soe, which is achieved with happiness. Dude, I think even the developer has it out for the line. As for sprites, it's the same as it was before. Oh, and of course, how can we do this without the dex entry? Although Babos is very ugly, it has a powerful and incredible charm for opposite gender. This is very mysterious, but some scientists say it's on Babos' eyes. Of course, I could joke about the English again, but why would I do that when we got scientific proof that a dad bod is the sleeper build we need to go for? Better yet, we got the redesigning segment up next. Deciding to not ruin the one thing that's going for it, I go for the option of remastering the sprite by enhancing the big body shape everyone dreams of, and also touching up things like its legs and jaw to mesh better together when looking at the full picture. Though to be honest, I got nothing much else to say, cause it took my breath away. Ooh. Finally fulfilling the desire to see it remade in its original game, we also get more action with a remade icon, back sprite with the same energy, and a shiny? Yep, it's an okay shiny, I guess. Though on an actual special note, let's see the special surprise. If you've been around for at least a moment in the Pokemon community, there's a good chance that you have also heard about the fanbase and their own Pokemon game creations. almost as long as the game franchise itself. Though, when I gave it some extra thought, a question came to my mind. How long has this been going on for? While going deeper and deeper, I came across not only one of the oldest Pokemon ROMs ever, but also one that many directly or passingly have seen before, especially with the likes of its bootleg cartridges and infamous screenshots. Now, you may be thinking why I'm bringing this up. Just like with many beloved timeless things these days, what could be a better idea than remaking and giving Pokemon Chaos Black a second wind in the modern era? So, just like how I've been doing it for 3 episodes now, I'll be taking a batch of Fakemon designs from the game, analyze them and their data from the game, then just like the title suggests, I'll give them a fresh coat of paint. But before we do that, what about the game itself? Developed by a person that goes by the name of Mew3 Inc., Pokemon Chaos Black was first made public sometime in 2004. Featuring the smallest roster of Fakemon yet, Chaos Black gives us the opportunity to use 60 plus new designs, even though most of them have their own special little quirks attached to them. When it comes to the game's story and other features, the story is only a slight tweak at most, though intentionally due to the dev going for a definitive edition approach for Fire Red Leaf Green, the same thing that Emerald was to Ruby and Sapphire, hence explaining the ROM's title theming. But hey, at least you get to see goofy shinies much more with a 1 out of 100 shiny rate. Like many already know, or even solely remember this ROM hack by, the mascot on the game's box art is pretty much a 1-to-1 replica of Sonic the Hedgehog's character Chaos, even though it itself never appears anywhere in the game, nor being even as much as somewhere in the game's code. Actually, speaking of the code, the game has also been quite infamous thanks to many bugs and glitches, which arose due to the game being shoddily coded, even being bad enough to a point that it was impossible to get past Mount Moon without using cheats. Though a good while later, a fan released a version which fixed such issues. Since this point up to the present, Chaos Black has remained as a memory of a glitchy, frustrating game. Though I think it's time to finally revisit it and give at least some of the game's fan-made Pokemon designs a second shot. Finally reaching the designs themselves, what's a better way to start this than by beginning with a starter? I mean, that's why they are literally called that, right? Oh, and here I thought BDSP was the worst recent thing. Moving on from wallowing in one common Pokemon fan's misery, let's see what the correctly named starter has to offer for us. Being the final stage in its line after Flareon and Manleon, Furion comes at us with a surprisingly niche type combo, then follows that up with quite peculiar stats. Wait a minute. Do just reuse Typhlosion's stats? Oh man, that's not cool. Huh. In a weird way, that's actually kind of cool. And Game Freak did do that also themselves, so fine, you get a pity pass. Though let me tell ya, when it comes to the sprites for these guys, barely 3 of today's 5 have custom back sprites and 0 custom icons. And if that wasn't bad enough for me, a nice little extra bitch slap is that not a single one has a custom dex entry either. Well, I think one had a custom dex category name, so it ain't that bad. Fuck this. Let's just see what I eventually cooked up. Despite it having almost no visual resemblance, Furion has recently been discovered to have closely matching genetics with the likes of the Charizard and Typhlosion families. Starting simple, but with even more ridiculous upcoming designs, will come more goofy entries as well. Though for now, let's try to actually make it special and do the thing I'm actually somewhat good at. Learning that thankfully not all of my brain cells have dusted away, I quickly assess that the design is meant to be a bipedal lion. Deciding to lean into the claws enhanced by being imbued with rocks aspect, I go for a design that min-maxes all of its other elements to put the most in its claws, aka having a lighter body so that overall mobility is not reduced as much. And since I decided to stay with the stat spread that's been around more than your mom at this point, haha, got him, I remember to embrace the higher special attack stat with imposing flames that could act as a stable plan B for battles. Late game spriting shenanigans later, let me introduce you to the glow up that was due for 20 years. And if that isn't cool enough already, I also made a fresh new icon and back sprite off screen to act as a nice little surprise for you still watching. Heck, I'll do one better. Here's also the shiny. As for why it looks a little bit off, I thought it would be kind of cool to reference their glitchy origins by using a palette that's similar to the original. And if that still wasn't cool enough, with the groundwork now set, let's start building up quicker and get to see even more cool designs like... If you've seen any of my previous episodes, you may already know that I like to pick one random pick for the batch of ones I'll remake. Though when I was flashbanged with core memories being unlocked, and getting to see this caked up rock in the crossfire, I knew what I was picking next. So, made the design with upcoming funny facts about it, taking a little bit of time until eventually learning it's a replacement of Cloister in all ways besides the botched sprites. Soon after, I come to learn that this meme-worthy design actually has a reason for its rough, trimmed-looking sprite. While diving in the game's code, I continuously came across errors when I got to the section that held Grog. Upon investigating deeper, I learned that when the devs got to adding it in, they somehow botched the process and ended up putting in a sprite sheet that had no front sprite. So when the ROM adjusted itself, the back sprite ended up shifting to the front slot as a default, in result getting this scuffed masterpiece. If you thought this is the craziest origin story ever for a Fakemon, just wait how stupid it gets later. On a different note, Grog's stats are a bit more than copied from Cloister, but by this point, it shouldn't be a surprise. So, of course, I took some liberties and made it more unique to Grog while keeping the total within plausible numbers. And now with just the dex entry left, let's remove the last remaining hints of Cloister and give Grog something unique. Constantly dealing with growing rock pains, Grog spend most of their time trying to find objects that can help them shave off the slowly crushing rocks. It's suggested that Grog trainers should seek out Cloisters due to their tough shells, which get the job done. Like I said, this dude was mostly Cloister before, so why not reference its history with an entry like this? And to keep it interesting, I'll do it for the rest that have similar origins as well, just like with Furion as well. But for now, let's continue on with improvements to the thing that gives it uniqueness. Now that we've gotten a more creative dex entry that definitely was not made after the sprite, we got something more that we can use to create a better redesign. Doubling down on the back sprite being the front instead for the memes, I also keep elements that retain the armadillo-like vibes which I got from the original. Following that, I turn Armadillo's armor into the growing rock focused element for the design that will give Grog its hunched over look as an extra explanation. After some slight adjustments that could make it match its stats more, we can now get a chance to see our caked up pal in a new light from multiple angles, even when it comes to the shiny. But even with all of this, we can't forget about... Ah yes, now that's much better. But before I tell you about it, let me tell you about this video's sponsor, my Patreon page. Cheesy, I know, but any type of support helps. If you enjoy my videos and want to support me while getting something out of it, be sure to visit my page where you can get things like direct downloads to my work, advice and help for making your own stuff, while also getting free stuff from me every month. Of course, there's much more stuff included, but even just a slight peek means a lot. But with that being said, let's dive right back in. If you didn't get the chance to vote or know about it, this chapter's remake contender was decided by you, the viewers. Though, if I knew how mysterious and empty this Fakemon would have been earlier, we wouldn't be discussing it currently. But then again, the hack itself is buggy as fuck, so don't mind me. Though as for what I meant with the empty comment about this guy, you would think that the fella that you'd use as the first face you see in the game would at least make an appearance in the ROM, right? I'm sure you can guess the answer, but in reality, it's actually much worse. Turns out, not only you can't find it anywhere, but it doesn't even exist past the title screen. Like, it doesn't even have a name, for crying out loud. Now, I know the guy on the box art is based on Chaos from Sonic, but that doesn't explain this edgelord design for dummies, unless I'm missing something. So instead of remaking it, technically I'm just making and adding a whole new Fakemon that's just based on a semi-scrap design. And yeah, that just makes this video that much more unique. Oh, and I guess I have to give it a name, stats and other stuff as well. So, why wait? When it comes to the name, the absurd nature of this situation and the overall quality of the ROM as a whole just makes ironically, or maybe even unironically, naming it Title Guy feel so correct. Basing on how edgy the devs were probably planning to make it, I based the typing and stats around that thought with a pinch of actual logistics. As for the rest, pause and take a peek at what I made for the new guy when adding him in. Though what I did do for the Pokédex entry, Title Guy lashes out against anything it can. Its reasoning is unknown, though it's believed to be due to going unnoticed for 20 years, even though its population has been healthy. Due to this, the term Entide Guide has become popular to describe salty attention seekers. Went for something goofy, got an ironic masterpiece instead. But before anyone thinks I tried, it's time to actually try. Having the least amount of material to work with yet, I let my creative juices flow with spurs of multiple shapes until one eventually clicks. With a rough shape now in mind, I transfer all of the original's key aspects to the new body and work from there with more Pokemon-like colors, shading and spriting until being satisfied enough with the result, closing off with animating that you'll see soon enough. At the very least, we can now say that the design actually exists. But what is a Fakemon without its icon and backsprite as well? So don't mind me showing you these exact sprites as well. Also, what's a Pokemon without its shiny that's based on its glitchy, buggy past? And before we run out of steam, Oh yeah, we definitely peaked with this chapter and its shenanigans. Though, why not stay up here a bit longer? Okay, maybe I spoke a bit too soon, but let's make this work with a quick interesting fact as the intro. While diving into the ROM to conduct some research, I discovered that the early Bug Routes Fakemon Charizard, which evolves into this chapter's main star Shikun, is actually a part of a 3-stage line. Well, at least it was intended to be, but the design never got finalized, having Pidgeot be left as the placeholder for the evolution. Though, if you look at its Kakuna-inspired design and honestly piss poor stats, I'm sure it was somewhat obvious. So, taking this into consideration, I adjusted its stats and took to mind these facts for the redesigning stage when creating the new sprites. I could have made the final stage myself, but at least we have something prepped for a Chaos Black Part 2 if it happens. Besides other small things like the ability, we also have the beloved non-existing turned into an existing Dex entry, awaiting its metamorphosis stage to eventually be over. Shikun bide their time preparing for their true form to appear. despite their instincts being so set on this expectation, none have actually achieved evolution. Now, let's slide over to the other end of this escapade. Remaining with a mentality that this is the final stage for now, I take what works in the original sprite, then mash that up with new or enhanced elements that make the original's ideas work better in this new lighting. While, of course, simply just refining it as a whole in the Gen 5 style gives it a better shot at looking more imposing and cleaner, giving it also segments in the cocoon that seem like they are on the cusp of bursting due to all the pent-up energy within the shell. I close this off with the animation process, in which I give it stiff and rigid movements, like you would expect from a developing encased bug. So Kakuna who? Well, actually Kakuna does have it beat in the Gen 5 sprite department, but not for long. In the meantime, we can now see cool stuff like the icon that this time is actually unique to it, while also looking quite caked up from the back, goddamn. As for the shiny, I just did the same thing as with the rest, but enough of that. It's time to actually outperform Kakuna. Yeah, it's pretty cool, alright, Kakuna Matata, or whatever. Though, do you remember how I said we hit peak before? Yeah, I lied, because nothing can beat being none other than the #1 design that everyone pointed to for being the most infamous Pokemon hoax back in the young internet days. Mewfree is easily the most recognizable and memorable thing from this hack, besides its reputation and box art itself. So it would have been quite ridiculous of me to not include it in this video. Since it's a legendary, of course, it would also have a legendary stat spread, which we can see here. Though it's not as it seems. Yup, just like the rest, Mewfree just uses Moltres' 580 stat total, but before I go further, why the hell are there legendaries that have stats below 600? Like, there are Pokemon that have 600, yet are called pseudo-legendaries. But when it comes to other Pokemon that have 580 or more, they're just some common bitch because they don't stand waiting all day in a spot while waiting for a 10-year-old. Double standards? Not in my children-based demographic Game Freak. Anyways, where was I? Oh yeah. For your chicken stats. But now back to more big burly man-like topics. I decided to take Mewtwo's stat spread and tinker with it to create an upgraded version, while not going too overboard with increases and limiting myself to just a total increase of 40. As for something that I did go a bit too overboard with, believed to be nothing more than an old ruse, Mewfree is said to be a higher form of the already elusive Mewtwo. There are rumors that claim this form is achieved only when a Mewtwo that's mastered the move Psych Up absorbs the powers of the legendary birds. Well, usually you could make a joke about it being a mischievous Pokemon, but instead, I'll just ask you to rate the entries while I get onto turning this rumor into a fact. Immediately identifying what makes the original Mewfree unique in comparison to Mewtwo, I go for the obvious inspiration for the demeanor. Adjust the proportions that Mewtwo has, then go all out with the rest by applying changes to its body patterns, shoulder pads, tail, and the rest with mixes between the original Mewtwo's unique aspects and what could be modern interpretations for those exact things, ending up with a result that's easily one of my best works yet. Of course, that also applies for the back, icon, and shiny sprites as well. But when it comes to the mentioned demeanor, it shows up the most when we look at Snakewood, Sweet, Quartz, Chaos Black. All of these and more similar hacks are considered to be ROMs with polarizing and wacky levels of quality when it comes to their Fakemon designs. So remaking them usually is more easier than actually playing them. But what if we try to up the ante and redesign a cast which is already considered to be top-notch beside the offensive parts? Well, in today's video, I'll be taking Pokemon Clover and a batch of its Fakemon designs, then attempting to give them a fresh coat of paint. Will this work out? Will I tackle or change controversial designs? All that and more in today's episode of ROM Design Remakes. But first, here's Clover's. Most likely being well known than many of its designs already, Pokemon Clover was initially created by members of 4chan's VP board, with a dev by the name of Clover Camera being the lead, which first made its debut in February 10th, 2015, and kept being updated up until 2020, being heavily based on internet culture, memes, and making a parody of multiple things like the Pokemon franchise itself. Clover presents a cast of not only 386 brand new Fakemon, but also such things like 2 regions by the names of Fortune and Ebin, new cast of characters which, despite the game's reputation, are written much better than your usual cringy or edgy self-insert. I mean, Professor Stump is already a better name than the whole group of Snakewood characters as a whole. I got to give them that. Well, he is based on Danny DeVito, so that does get some free points either way. As for the plot, you meet such characters like the ever-so-charming rival Edgy, while also coming across a criminal organization with a name that strikes fear into anyone. Of course, there is also the badge collecting aspect, but that's an excuse for witnessing all of the new Fakemon with the biggest hit or miss ratio that I've ever seen. So, to finally get on with taking a closer look at them, let's hit it off with... Like with any start of an adventure, there always is a starter involved. And for this scenario, it's one of Clover's offerings. Our dear hemorrhoid-riddled mammal here comes pre-loaded with such clever jokes like cheek pouch and analytic. Former being most likely a cheeky implication of Rectream storing berries up where the rich soil is made from, and latter, well, having the first 4 letters form a word that's relevant to the tree's origin. Having varied base stats that still total up to an expected starter stat number, Rectream also can get up more close and personal than the back sprite already does with stories from its dex entry. If 2 Rectream meet, they fight using their trees. Whoever loses suffers a horrible enema from the victor. If you don't know what enema is, I'm semi-sorry that you do now. But then again, you clicked on a video about a ROM that has such things as a sexy sentient pizza and historically off-putting furnace fakemon, so what did you expect? Let's not think too much about it and get on with our first redesign. To be honest, I had some trouble with what to do for the remake at first. Then, after deciding that I could embolden the core of the design, which is its buttocks, and stuff like that, being Pokemon Clover's main appeal anyways, I mega evolved the ridiculousness and not only turned the tree into a more stereotypical fart cloud, but also make the tree's roots look like a thong. Oopsie. Then to tie the sharding idea further home, I make it constantly have a stomach-grasping pose, while having it look like it has socks on, while otherwise being completely naked, due to the meme where a constipation is so insane that you take all of your clothes off from the struggle. Yeah, this video is going to be quite a bumpy ride, isn't it? Though, at least we're luckier than this Rectream and whatever constipation it's going through, so it's not that bad. And I did remake the whole cast of relevant sprites with the shiny included. That's based on the original, just like the others will be. So it's actually quite good in the end after all. Well, it's not actually the end until we... Okay, now it's actually the end. For us. Unfortunately, that Rectream still got a branch up his ass, so let's leave him be and move on to something worse. Like regular viewers may guess already, my usual pick for the second slot is... I'm not racist, I swear. Moving on, before I inspire any allegation activity, I decide to pick Sombaludo for its teetering balance between acceptable and controversial. Since if we're doing a video about a ROM that's mostly known for these type of designs, why not actually cover a few of them? Otherwise, there's really no point in covering Clover. Back to the topic at hand, Sombaludo introduces itself with Sniper, Sandstream as its regular, then Comatose or Sandveil as its possible hidden abilities. Well, there's also the case of it being a clean split between male and female, so the ladies aren't missing out on any exquisite stashes that the Evo line has grown out. Now, all of that is nice, which matches nicely with a stat spread that totals up to be 10 points higher than the tree dumping grass starter. If that wasn't impressive enough, the entry also boasts about the marksman's skills. Notorious for its perfect accuracy, it can shoot any target from 200 miles away while sleeping. Quick and straight to the point, just like the sharpshooter itself. So let's maintain the speed and load up the chamber with words "remake" written all over it. Embracing what makes the design so cool, I turn the Lone Desert Ranger aspect of the design that's hinted by the dex entry to 11 and go all out by turning it into less of a Mexican stereotype mix and more into something that could be in related circles to the likes of Cacturn and crew. Now, that may be a reach for some, but hey, remember with what I'm working with here. I pass off the mustache element as a natural evolution for the line across the years that helps it with not getting sand in its size, while having a poncho-like coating to keep itself warm in the night when it hunts. With a few edits and animating phases that ends with a literal bang, Sombaludo brings the high noon with a new look from multiple angles. Then doesn't forget the assist that makes it a full design, and shiny that's inspired by the original. But the true highlight of the game comes with a quick transition to what can I say that hasn't already been said? Well, besides it not looking the same as before, there's also the fact that Sombaludo doesn't have anything stuffed in its throat. Wait, what? The third being a pick by the community like usual, though this time specifically from the Patreon votes. Our dear double throat goat Upchuckin here barely outperformed the thing that would have simplified the thumbnail creation process and made it onto this video's cast. I already can hear people revving their engines in concern of Torchic's condition, and maybe one person about Farfetched, but fear not. Being based on a dish called turducken, Upchuckin incorporates the food's aspect of consisting of a duck and chicken being stuffed into a turkey by having Pokemon equivalents take their place, but it seems like stuffing a Torchic into a turkey is where the Clover devs draw the line, since it and Farfetched are just dull replicas. Phew, had me sweating there for a bit, guys. Anyways, Upchuckin also comes stuffed with Drought as its regular and Innards Out or Flare Boost as its hidden abilities. But shoving a bit deeper, we also can see quite the chunky stat spread that sums up to an impressive 559 total. But now that it's prepped, we can actually read what's on the menu. It harnesses the power of the living dolls in its mouth to generate heat. It was very powerful in ancient times. Weirdly more simplistic and normal sounding than what I expected, but I guess we got to also leave some room for the main dish. Since the two stuffed bird Pokemon turned out to be dolls after all, I decided it would be some extra goofy fun if I throw in a rubber chicken aspect, or, well, the turkey, and gave it hints of that exact thing by adjusting the properties and look of the body, while also having the wings be much smaller than the rest. Just like, say it with me, rubber chicken even though it's a turkey, yeah! Making the colors also more vibrant, while reusing as much colors as I can to not go over the restrictive 16 color limit that the Pokemon games have, so that I can also get the colors of Torchic and Farfetch'd correct. We're already ready to see the final result in action by playing with it in the actual game like before. This also includes the icon and shiny versions for the sprite, but that's just a segue to the big bad. Oh yeah, that sure was a hefty serving. But don't get too stuffed yet, because we also need to get ready for the dessert? As the fourth pick for today, Kokemoth runs up with Suspicious Delight as our wildcard choice of this batch. Growing up from a snuff ant at level 32, it shows its abilities with such obviously cheeky ones like Speed Boost, Slush Rush, Overcoat, and Snow Warning, which go together with the also expected Ice type, being the third in the row to outperform Rectream once again in the stat department with a juicy 530 total. Kokemoth doesn't wait around with an entry that goes like this. Kokemoth can't last 6 seconds without snorting cocaine. It will go on a rampage and overdose on its own hailstorm. Even though that seems goofy in its own right, turns out our excited fella here had an alternate dex entry in earlier versions of the game. You're welcome! Better yet, it's time to get some Candy of the Eye variant for yourselves with incoming remaking. Having the design already be so dead set on a concept, Kokemoth took the longest for me to redesign solely for those exact reasons. After deciding to shuffle around the way the definitely snow aspect was implemented, I embraced the bulkiness that's reflected in the stats and unexpected slow speed stat, which with the help of a possible speeding up ability could bring it back. Also gets reflected in the later showcased animation. But for now, it's time we bring the new product into the light and digest the different look. If that doesn't do the trick, there's also the expected icon that's using the same colors as the original, just like the rest of the batch, which also is a similar case with the shiny and the inspiration from the original. Yet, unlike something that the original did not have, now that the rush is over, take in the view of this beauty while you still can. With the time slipping by quicker than you expected, get ready for the finisher that is the evasive Now I know that the last one usually is a legendary, like with Mew3 or Kaosune in previous episodes, though let me present you evidence that makes this choice valid. I rest my case. Now that you see how awesome, and on top of that adorable, Ribazap is and are on my side, no doubt, no cap, let's get this show on the road. Having the expected lightning rod, dry skin and motor drive, then the surprise pick of liquid voice as its available abilities, Ribazap also has the passive ability of taking its lower stats than the rest with pride, since it already knows that it more than makes it up with its cuteness and coolness factor. If you aren't somehow already convinced, take a look at its adorable entry. When it finds an outlet, it'll connect to it with its tail. It croaks loudly when fully charged. Sorry, Bellybolt, but turns out there was already a cooler electric frog in town all along. Besides the obvious pointer that Ribazap may be based on any frog from the big cast of relevant internet memes like Pepe, Kermit or that boy, there's not much reason to not start redesigning it. Acknowledging the fact that Ribazap is precious and there's no replacing it, I start making a relative to the family and begin with a closer depiction to a possible inspiration for the original, which in this case is Pepe and a more frog-like body, while also being accompanied with a color scheme that's more saturated and upgraded from the original. Yet, I also realized that the palette accidentally gives off more Benten alien energy than I at all intended. Just rolling with the punches, I keep it how it is and complete all the other sprite-related practices. Then finally get to showing it off in-game with, if I do say so myself, quite good end results. The icon does its job pretty good as well. Then when it comes to the shiny, the saturated color upgrade from the original also does it justice. And to make some extra sparks fly, well, it isn't legendary by the game's terms, though it sure as hell is in my heart. Pokemon ROM hacks are a beloved part of the community that gives fans more opportunities for a brand new adventure with fan-made games. And just like with the originals, there's also nostalgia for the outdated classics. But what if they follow the official game's footsteps and got remade too? Well, with my skills that barely qualify as being called skills, it's time to dive into another episode of Pokemon ROM Remake. Like the title suggests, today we are revisiting a ROM that's a classic for all the wrong reasons. Though, since we covered its history and other quirks besides the main topic, which is the Pokemon themselves, I invite you to watch that and come back later if you haven't. Then get ready for the main course by upping the ante and making some actual changes to the ROM itself. Don't you dare think I didn't hear your sneaky comments. Taking 5 full videos to finally tackle the ROM as a whole itself, what could be the very first thing that I would attempt at revamping? Could it be the overall tile set? Or maybe just do away with the dialogue that made the game so infamous? Or maybe the most needless thing possible?
You got me.
Taking way too much time after understanding why Pokemon Ruby is so minimally ROM hacked as it is, I get to a HP box sprite that matches the game's goofy, edgy vibe. Just ketchup, don't you worry, YouTube. After that, a sudden urge to tackle the overworld tiles hits me next. So, for a few hours I go at it, only to rage quit. I wonder if I'll return to that in the video later, while running around and realizing that, of course, besides the Fakemon themselves, the most reoccurring graphic from the game is the protagonist you play as yourself. So, after using tactics that make Nintendo's skin crawl at the slight thought of someone paying tribute, with an official copy of course, I obtain and modify every relevant part and slowly work to a brand new design, which I, of course, redo in a way that has the original still visible in it. Since the protag is mentioned to be Brendan's brother, while the OG dev Cutlerine probably thought that the white hat was hair, I combined the two elements by having the definitely not OC have a strand of white hair, then also modify the original's body shape to be similar with Brendan once again. Okay, the results are cool and all, just don't tell anyone that this took 2 days. Scurrying along to change more stuff, I go through the whole decks and not only adjust their stats, dex entries, and moves, then also do something similar for some good old trainers that made most of us weaken our scalps. But only for the most notable and special Pokemon and trainers. I don't have that little of a social life, have a little faith. I also add in the remakes that I made in the previous Snakewood video, then modify the wild encounters and teams so they make actual appearances. And if more appearances is what tickles your fancy, I fulfill my past child's wishes, and probably some of yours as well, by actually making the zombie Fakemon findable and usable. Phew, that was quite hefty. How about we take a small break by remaking some Fakemon, then continue tackling the ROM after that. Acting as our opener for the Fakemon segment, which will eventually lead to a big bad legendary, stay tuned for that, the humble Homebeast presents itself as the final evolution in its 2-stage line, rocking a ground-shaking type combo that's definitely never seen before, while offering some other interesting facts about it, only to be used as a segue into its stat total for current purposes. Before we jump into the design coverage though, I heard that this vast power Fakemon has a dex entry to show for us. Homebeast's inner power has been unleashed. It now possesses both claws and can deal double the damage. Well, 1.5 times, at least. I'm pretty sure that the 1.5 times comment pokes at it now having an extra claw in comparison to the first stage having only one. Finally jumping into the redesign phase, I instantly run into my first struggle instantly. What can I even do for the redesign of the poor man's pet rock? Besides the upgrade to a more refined and animated style of the Gen 5 games that a new sprite would provide, I turn to the first stage, where I learned about its weird kink of willingly taking blows all day. Besides the raunchy joke your inner 13-year-old is currently making, I decide to replicate this personality in the wannabe crustaceans design by making the initial crack split open in the evolution, which also begins to double as a sharp teeth-looking mouth, while not going too overboard with it to make it seem natural for the design and not pull away from the claws. With your patience finally paying off, the chance to see Homebeast with a sleek new look has finally been fulfilled. Same goes for the back and icon sprite that don't complain about the design simplicity. As for the shiny, every remake today will have a shiny that has a ghostly theme to keep it representative of its origin, since the originals didn't have shinies in the first place. Although, there now also exists something that didn't before. Now being more than just a boulder, it's time to see some additional Fakemon follow the same fate. Having the honor of being remade be bestowed upon it due to being one of the most popular designs from the hack, the Quillfish evolution that beat Overquill by 12 years has surprisingly been mentioned as one of the hack's positives by fans. So let's see what it brings to the table. Having the expected typing and abilities that come from Quillfish, Quillshark, on the other hand, brings some heat to the table with quite the impressive stat total, even rivaling the likes of, check it, Gyarados. Actually, speaking of Gyarados, the Dex entry may have something to say about that. The eternal rival of Gyarados, Quillshark, is much rarer than its more famous cousin. Its temper is 1,000 times worse. Well, I sure do love some good old rivalries, so you got me there. But then again, Quillshark's main appeal is its design. So what about that? Unlike the usual issue, this time coming up with a new design was a surprisingly easy task. Though, just like with anything that seems too good, the difficulty remained true with newfound problems in the execution department. Although the design is surprisingly beloved with all of its origins and history behind it, I would say that the connection between Quillshark and Quillfish is somehow less visible than the likes of Octillery and Remade. So to tie them both together, I worked on keeping the core aspects of the evolution intact, while applying Quillfish identifying elements to the new design, which started to shape and showcase themselves nicely on the new body with a more aggressive pose that matches the puffer's nature. So, I don't know about you, but in my opinion, the mix between a more faithful evolution and the OG design doesn't do anything but justice to the sprite. Literally backing that up with the back sprite and the icon sprite, a comparison can showcase the contrast just that much more. Despite the previously laid out stipulation for how I'll act with the shiny sprites, I already make an exception for the rule with a palette that makes a reference to the original coloring. But when it comes to the biggest standout, alright, that's cool and all, but now there's just an important question knocking. Are you picking this or Overquill? While you decide, let's get back to making changes to the ROM, then redesign more Fakemon after that. To make this a bit more interesting, it's time to tackle the map itself. Running over the list of maps that either need changes to them desperately or just ones that I had some ideas for, I go ahead and give them a dose of a fresh new start. Yet, after all of this, I realize only a few hours later that I forgot to change the battle back sprites for the main trainer. So let me just... whoop! Isn't that much better? Here's a better look, since it does skip by pretty fast. But getting back to the map as a whole, to be the finisher for the larger scale edits, I quickly figure out and start modifying the whole game's look and palette. So in result, the initial tone that the ROM wants to present is more quickly seen and felt, with the help of the new semi-washed out, though at the same time fitting, gloomy vibe. That probably feels satisfying enough to count it as enough for modifying the ROM. How about we give some more spotlight to the Fakemon instead? Coming from the lands by the name of literally winning by a sliver in the Patreon poll, Psypig ends up being the next in line for a remake due to our lovely Patreons, which you can also become if you want exclusive content, special sprite work, and more if you check down below. Unlike what popular belief in the context of a small cult classic ROM's fanbase would say about the pig's lineage, Psypig, surprisingly enough, has no relation to the Grumpig family, no matter how alike they look. Psypig also comes pre-cooked with a fire psychic typing, then wedges in little extra tidbits, and quite the impressive stat total for an initially unimportant seeming design. When it comes to the best part of this ordeal, one peek at its dex category is enough to make a grown man giggle. Oh, right, that reminds me, time for the Pokédex entry as well. Psypig travel in roving packs that fleece unsuspecting tourists of their money. The glyph on its forehead foretells the date of its death. Yeah, I feel like some artistic liberties with changes are coming up sooner than expected. Despite landing on a design that has more to offer than literally just a sentient sphere, Psypic's simple look initially didn't shy away from triggering some good old artist glow. Yet, when I eventually just begin with the proportion shifts that match the Gen 5 sprites, a slew of ideas or small changes come to mind, slowly bringing me to a result that's bright enough to satisfy. Speaking of bright, seeing as the first version for the animation seemed a bit too bland, let's be honest, I applied some personality to the little piggy and made its psychic typing rear its head into the frame with literally energetic eyes. So with just as much energy, I present to you the third redesign that was selected by my most loyal fans, having some traits of the simple yet effective under its newer title. The icon, front and back sprite succeed quite well for what they are meant to be, while the shiny is back to being with just an aerial look, like I originally envisioned. But above all, none of these can compare to the might of Yeah, I'll give you that much. I have no clue where the fire typing plays a role here. Maybe the next one can explain that fate? Dragging my feet up until this point for covering an undead fakemon design in an undead focused ROM hack, I pick one at random from the category and land on Grim Reaper, the least fleshed out design from the roster, though it turns out that it has an evolution on top. Oh well, the RNG giveth, the RNG taketh. Acting as a great example for what the phrase smoke and mirrors represents, Grim Reaper beyond the front sprite is nothing more than just a carbon copy of Cypher. Who would have guessed? Since everything down even to the dex entry is unoriginal, it's time to also remake other stuff. Slightly modifying the stats, I mostly just add and shuffle around stat points to build upon Cypher's existing build, since the design leans already quite well into the Reaper aesthetic, though I make it stand out much more with a much more unique typing. I almost made it a ghost ice typing due to such sayings like bone chilling and sending shivers down your spine that usually associates with ghosts, but the ghost steel compo seemed much more logical. When it comes to some actual creativity though, let's see what I came up with for the dex entry. Gaining energy from feeble souls, Grim Reaper passes off power to avoid overexertion when there's a surplus. This power is seen in unidentified type moves like Curse. Try to fit the edgy feeling that the ROM already presents, but maybe I overdid it just a little. Oh well. Instead, let's finally touch up the design. Taking 2 whole videos to finally cover an actual zombie design in a zombie game, I land on the poorly executed Grim Reaper design that uses Cypher as its base, then use the opportunity of it being barely edited to swoop in and finish the task myself, transforming the key elements of Cypher by applying a look that comes from the boned game ender itself, turning these somewhat already scythe-looking mandibles into a more concrete resemblance now instead, which gets assisted with Clover that pulls the whole ghoul together to form a fully fledged, new, remade look for the undead Pokemon that took 9 slots for me to finally cover a design from this ROM's main Fakemon group. But hey, I would wait 9 more slots for other designs as well if I knew that they could turn out so great in the end. Which, of course, also applies for the off-screen made renditions for the back and icon sprites. When it comes to the shiny, the recolor comes with a double meaning of not only referencing the original, that is Cypher, but also having moldy, rotting properties with a putrid green coloring on top, which matches the initial shiny theming that I planned. Though, for the final part of my plan, now, some might say that this design could take your soul away, but that snatching power more belongs to the final upcoming redesign with how it'll take your breath away. Finally bringing a legendary as the final proposition to be remade in the selected batch once again, Lucazamon is one of many Snakewood's legendary Fakemon, featuring a cool typing, which gets assisted by the usual blabber. The female-only legendary, of course, is made more unique by being locked behind one of many Snakewood's infamous puzzles, in this case needing to go to a place by the name of Mount Doom, where you need to bring a Pokemon with explosion after enough story progression, which, without the graces of walkthroughs, would be rage-quittingly tedious to figure out yourself. But if you manage to obtain this Beauty and the Beast, you would gain access to the 608 stat total legendary, while also having the opportunity to read a special entry. Lucazamon is the embodiment of destruction. She sleeps in deep caves until she is called with the Rage Release spell. Well, Rage Release spell is definitely an alternate way to call explosion by. I think I'll just make a pool myself with a redesign instead though. Thank you. Personally, considering that the design is pretty good for what it is, I decide to more so build upon the original, rather remake and replace it with a new design, with new properties also applied to the legendary, so that it fits the Gen 5 look. I proceed further with making the main body part channel and maintain the icy bolts that run through its body to keep everything together, which, with the help of it now being animated, I also turn the chilly lightning, or whatever it is, into a much better reflection of itself with the now animated motions, just like the new design itself. Now, living up more to its title as a legendary, Lucazamon gets reintroduced quite quickly with a fresh new sprites and fitting icon. Then for the shiny, I keep the short-lived tradition alive by applying some spoopy colors. And to finally put an end to this, Pokemon ROMs in recent times have drastically improved in their quality as fan-made projects, while the classics have stayed in the dumps throughout the years. Though, what if they got remakes just like the official Pokemon games as well? Well, in today's episode of ROM Remake, we'll be doing exactly that with the ROM that you selected in the poll. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. Of course, what's a Pokemon ROM remaking video without, well, actually tackling the game itself? Starting off strong by adding in the last 5 designs I remade for the previous episode into this new roster, while also rebalancing and making them findable in the wild so that they are more aligned with the new game's layout. And while we're on the topic of visuals, I make some more changes in this category by making a new HP box to not only make it more unique, but also keep the sweetness alive. Also using the opportunity to learn how to make text boxes, I decided to polish the main character's design and rework some elements to keep the original trainer visible, yet now have accessories that are in line with the snack world. Going through the list of items, I get the idea of remaking some of their icons as an exercise of testing my skills with item icons, but more so not being able to get the idea out of my head if I didn't do it otherwise. While going over the list of trainers and fearing that I've been bamboozled by the Mandela effect, I realized that for some reason, the second game ended up not using some of the candy-themed trainer sprites. So, the last thing I do for the visual segment of ROM revampment is porting over all of the specially made sprites. Well, these changes definitely give the game a fresh new feeling to the game, though instead of front-loading the video with all the ROM changes, why don't we cover some of the Poke-Suites before diving deeper with more adjustments? Deciding to finally do a starter, since I didn't cover a single one in the first Pokemon Suite ROM video, Charizard mostly ends up as my pick, not only due to its popularity in all forms, but also thanks to the fact that I at least had an idea as to what I could do for the design, unlike the other, already pre-solid 2. But before we cover the design, we need to learn a bit more about it. Due to the fact that this ROM has a new type chart, Charizard is introduced with an unsurprising Strawberry type. Moving on, having not only moved around stats, but 9 stat points lower in general than the original Charizard, at the very least makes Charizard more than a carbon copy, which the cookbook entry also backs up. It has been known to drool strawberry milk if its strawberry tail is ever bitten too hard. Strawberry milk? Yeah, I think it's best if we don't ask any questions and just start redesigning. Although I picked Charizard at first solely for the fact that it's a starter, and I didn't really have any ideas for a redesign, a rework eventually came to me in the form of changing what's more and less strawberry focused, while also giving it a palette that's more in line with your usual resemblance of the red round berry. Pushing the already limited concept of just a single berry and nothing else related to its limits, I used leaves to put a nice bow on top of the design to have them resemble Charizard's horns and create a cute little pattern on its belly with a berry. With the follow-up, that's the animation, and adding into the game process, the option of seeing the new sprites from front to back and in icon form on top is now possible. Of course, there's also a rare breed of the berry that we can find in a sparkling format, but the main focus most likely is if you think this is cool, let me just remind you that we're only getting started, especially since the next one is... While going through the game's inner structure to get some ideas for which designs to remake, I stumbled upon what seemed to be a scrap design, since besides the name and light recolor of the sprite, Robic Candy was mostly just lying around in the code. So why not look at what's actually added in for the fake one, then fill in the rest? Apparently being meant to be a pure lemon type, and having only Keen Eye as its ability, Robic Candy also is the final form in the line, being achieved once its pre-Evo Candy Pass, missed opportunity to call it Nose Candy, reaches level 25. Now, that's sweet and all, but the fact that this candy version of Probo Pass has 75 total stat points less than its vanilla counterpart makes for a big detriment to the line. Oh well, what's better than to rely on the cookbook once again? It is a flying transporter that carries small sweets in its nose. It bobs on the waves to rest its body. Huh, I guess it has nose candy after all? Either way, I'm sure that it didn't have a redesign in mind. Since the only thing I had to play off is the cookbook, recolor, and name, I had no other choice but to use my creative liberties in full force. Since Probopass already kind of has the body shape of it, while also the deck's entry mostly just mentioned dispensing and storing candy, I went ahead with the idea of turning Probicandy into a gumball machine, which also doubled for the mini noses. So after most of my time went going into painstakingly moving each gumball for each frame before being able to copy-paste them, the fruits of my spriting and ROM hacking labor rewards us well with the initially scrapped, now not being able to be called as such. The shiny once again is a rework of the OG shiny, but as for the standout, insert obligatory nose candy joke here, and let's keep going with... Seeing that this is the first ROM I've tackled that has Mega Evolution in it, I decided to take a few designs and present them as this video's version of the community pick, asking for people to vote on my Patreon, where you can also see exclusive sprites and behind-the-scenes updates. The vote eventually ended with Mega Gumtic barely placing first, so time to make it shine, becoming just slightly more saturated green when the pure lime type, gummy bear based Gumtic Mega evolves. The regular Gumtic stat total goes from a measly 450 to a much more impressive 550 total. But besides some extra info that it reaches evolution upon level 30, the only thing left is to see what the cookbook says about it. But since the Megas don't have one, I'll just make a new one that is associated with regular Gumticks. Upon Mega evolving, Gumtick adopts an aggressive nature. If it sees other Gumtick trying to steal food, it will absorb them and grow bigger. Hungry angriness and that usual Mega Pokemon anger mixed into one sounds about right. But hey, we need to actually put this beast onto paper instead of just imagining. Initially not realizing that I'm accidentally going for Blood Moon Ursaluna type of body shape, I make the extra gummy parts of the design more overflowing and the main focus of the Fakemon to showcase its aggressiveness and new absorbing properties more clearly. Taking quite a while to nail how the gum itself looks, due to me making this material for the first time, the rest comes more naturally, eventually being good enough to animate and add the final sprites into the game once finished. Feeling that I've made my patrons that voted for it quite proud with the brand new sprites of Mega Gumtick, I throw in an OG color-based shiny on top, then make it truly shine in the form of for my first ever Mega Pokemon sprite, I would say that it turned out pretty sweet. Yeah, I'll try to stop with the puns. But in the meantime, who's hungry for more ROM hacking? Since in the previous ROM hacking segment I mainly focused on the visuals, why don't we get more into the technical aspect for this part? While playing the start of the game to get a feel of it and how it compares to the first entry, I noticed a bit more cases of unbalanced levels and themes due to how the game is set up to be more open world. Changing up the amount of trainers that appear, while also making their teams be more adaptive to the players' levels by introducing flags to their script, which allows them to use specific teams with specific levels depending on the amount of progression. Keeping it a bit more simple for the wild Pokemon side of things by just reducing their levels a bit, since we all know that one point or another we'll use rare candies anyways. And speaking of rare candies, why not just give them to the player at the start to simplify it for those who want them, and give an option to decline for those who don't want them. That simple. And before you think you can beat the system, I decreased the rare candy sell price to $0. So I got you now, you little sucker. Yeah, okay, anyways. As for more topical changes to make use of the main focus of the ROM, I go over the list of moves and change moves that are mostly just the same thing as in the original games, while also making some completely new ones. Well, that's the last of what I came up with as new additions to the game. While you suggest some changes that you would also do in the comments, let's cover the last two best remade Poke-Sweets from today's picks, starting with... Although the ROM has plenty of solid and good-looking designs, the cookbook still had some designs that felt a bit subpar compared to its peers, so why not use the opportunity of me remaking stuff and redesign a Poke-Sweet that actually needs it? More specifically, the one that barely missed out on being in the first episode, becoming the apple cherry typed final form of the line on level 38. Parfellure is based on the dessert called Parfait, As for extra visual deliciousness, Parfalure finally is a Poke Sweet that has a higher stat total than its original version, more specifically being 5 points higher. As for the cookbook, it initially seemed that it was just a copy of Chandelure, though it didn't really match with any of its actual dex entries. In other words, isn't that neat? Why don't we just move on? While carefully trying to not just make a Vanillux 2.0, the easy option of making the core body be a chandelier-shaped ice cream tray and the soul fire element from Chandelure be some nice ice cream, or for the sake of consistency, frozen whipped cream instead. Getting quite hungry while shaping the glass body and the chili treat itself, I'll just skip to the finish line so that the same doesn't happen for you. With a fresh new look at the revamped Parfalure from the front, which looks just as cool from the back, the shiny also appears with a new flavor. Yet, that doesn't compete with... Yeah, I think it's best if we move this along before someone gets too hungrily impulsive. Continuing the tradition for this series, the last in this remake roster once again is a legendary/ROM mascot. In this case, the chocolate-typed Chocoban being both. Obviously, being based on the Easter chocolate bunny candy, the legendary that evolves at level 40 to receive the quite exotic stat total of 600, compared to the even more now disappointing 480, is actually a recurring main character in the first Pokemon Sweet game. But besides that, probably known fact, is the cookbook holding anything special either? It has a docile temperament and dislikes fighting. Tucking in its forelegs, it can dance gracefully. Yeah, pretty much what I expected from a goody two-shoes Pokemon OC. How about something less expected instead? Going for a more active and special-looking design that could match the unusual legendary status for the popular for the wrong reasons bunny, I add in a hint of the Mega Lopunny design while reworking the dress-like aspect to be more cotton candy based, while adding in a hint of milk chocolate to diversify the design. After realizing that it somewhat resembles Iris's champion outfit a bit too late, I just get the rest of the process out of the way to see if the newly added sprites for both points of view does the trick. Nope, still kinda looks like Iris. But hey, we can't forget about the shiny that was the main antagonist of the first game. If that still doesn't do the trick, wait until you see... Is it just me that's now getting a bit of Sailor Moon energy now instead? Many Pokemon games have gotten plenty of remakes in the past few years. But what about beloved community-made games too? Well, in today's video of ROM Remake, I'll be covering Pokemon Vega by remaking its Fakemon, difficulty, graphics, and more. So on that note, let's begin with... Since I mentioned that in my opinion this ROM is still underrated, that also implies that I don't have many issues with the game as it currently is, which is correct. Though, like the toxic but true saying goes, there's always room for improvement. Starting off with graphics-based changes first, then more technical things later in the video, I exercised and reinforced what I learned in the previous ROM remaking video by giving the text box a slightly new look, but decided to make a new HP box right after due to it being the same as the usual. After giving it a minty green look that matches the theme that the game already has, I give a thumbs up for the protagonist not just being Grit or a very simple copy of him, so I leave those sprites alone. Even though the default battle background is already changed compared to the usual, I wanted to use the opportunity and tried out replacing it with a newer, more in-depth version instead, applying the same mentality of trying new things for the sake of, well, trying new things. I also take a shot at reconfiguring the party screen and summary screen with some green mint elements like before, keeping the theme alive. Still feeling a bit more motivated, I try out making a new bag and its menu to learn more about the inner workings of this aspect, going over all of the changes one last time to make sure that everything works like intended and has no issues. Now that we have dipped our toes into the game's graphics, why not switch it up a bit and tackle the main appeal of ROMs like this next? Keeping the name true, our first Pokemon up for redesigning is a starter from the game's selection. If you have seen the previous episodes, you may have noticed that the last few have been the grass starters. So, ignoring the fact that I really wanted to remake the grass option once again, I chose the fire starter for the sake of diversity, which is also known as the fire steel Astignite. Well, clearly having some resemblance to the Skylander Blast Zone, Astignite seems to be actually based on robots and knights. The fandom states that it may also get inspiration from robot masters in the Mega Man franchise, which makes me somewhat agree with them when designs like Torchman and Magma Man enter the conversation. I mean, the stats justify the bulky and defensive-looking defense with a 530 stat total, so I guess we got to keep the largeness and the fake maligned Cyclops aesthetic in mind for the redesign, especially since the dex doesn't really give much besides the obvious. Revisiting some of the elements from the second stage's design, since the regular third stage doesn't really bear resemblance to it on its own. The bulkiness comes as expected into the frame with how I mentioned it before eventually, while also throwing in more elements that make it actually look more worthy of its steel typing. Getting to the always delightful coloring and shading phase, I give the steel parts of the body that metal-like texture, lightness to the flames, and the usual stuff for the rest, which ends with a finished Gen 5 sprite for later. As for now, I add all of the sprites into the game and use the opportunity to show them off in the ROM itself. Of course, the shiny is here too, with a reference to my previous Blast Zone comment, but let's finish Astignite with that Gen 5 look. Ah yes, now that's how you turn up the heat. But what about doing something more than remaking for the next? Deciding to try something new, and a bit more than just remaking, I choose Wispload for the sake of experimenting and giving it a new evolution, since it felt like it could use one. And that it apparently was planned to be a free-stage line, but that's besides the point. It itself turns out to be a pure fire type, but the design moves it an opportunity to make it fire ghost upon evolving is too obvious to not already mention. As for evolving, it needs a Firestone to do so, but with an incoming new evolution, I just make it necessary for the final stage instead, and make Willis evolve on level 30 instead. Despite it already having quite the immaculate stat total for a seemingly simple Pokemon, the existence of Archaeodon will never make me second guess the ability of getting an evolution ever again. So it seems more than fine enough. But most important thing of all, before being able to make an evolution, what is it based on? Not getting much really from the Dex entry, I instead use the ever-reliable Vega fandom page as my source. Wisploat has some resemblance to Mario and Luigi's boss, Cackleta's Soul. After some comparison, I wouldn't dare to disagree. So, using it as reference for the final stage could be beneficial. Getting to the designing phase, with all of the data now being covered, I instantly bring up the Mario and Luigi boss as a reference, yet end up making the shape and body more unique eventually, making sure to keep elements of the fire typing with a fire core that originates from the used Firestone that powers fiery wisps around it, referring to Wisploat's entry about them having minds of their own. As for the color, I made the palette more bright and spiced up due to its core now being a light source and illuminating through its body. Finally, I decided to give this new evolution the name Phantonate, since it was the name for the scrap design for the line. Seemed fitting, no? With Phantonate now implemented, what could be a better way of showing it off than with evolving Wisploat and using it in battle right after? Of course, the shiny sprite and menu sprite are here too, but with a double whammy for the new stage is having a Gen 5 sprite too. Well, I would say that I have achieved what I set out to do, but what do you think? Oh, and maybe you had a better idea for a remarkable Fakemon too? Like we usually do it, the third remake from the Fakemon roster was left up to you with a poll, which Soul Horizon eventually won. So just like that, let's see if there's a deeper reason for it. Or y'all thought it just looked like the most remake-worthy? Actually, that reminds me, I have a Patreon with exclusive content where you can see exclusive updates and sprites, direct access to all my existing and upcoming sprites, random other stuff and more, which you can see down below. Back to the main topic, Soul Horizon is a Phoenix-based fire dragon design. Yes, I know it's the third fight type in a row, deal with it. Which is the final stage with a pretty good stat total for what it is. As for deeper lore, the only real mentionable thing is that its flame wings are the core of its design, so I'll definitely keep that in mind. I guess it being called Phoenix before is actually the last thing I wanted to mention, so let's just speed it up and start redesigning. Deciding to go for a body shape and pose that lets the wings shine the most, I keep the initial idea of the concept alive, but this time in a new version with refined sizes and shapes of all of its parts. Finally tackling the wings and making them actually look fiery, I pull together the whole design with upgraded colors at the end, then bring the focus back onto the wings with an animation which gives them quite the spotlight. Having the rest of the sprites made and added into the ROM now too, we don't need to leave anything up to imagination and get to see all the sprites actually in-game instead. For Soul Horizon Shiny, I decided to just remaster the original version, then came up with something new right after. Now that's what I call rising from the ashes. But still doesn't change the fact that it's time for more. With the graphical aspect of the ROM covered, and using the small pause from remaking Fakemon, let's take a peek at the technical aspect of the game, and let's see what's worthy of a change. Going over the move list, and seeing that there are plenty of new custom moves, I felt a bit inspired and wanted to try adding some new ones myself, ending up with me adding a few moves like this. Still, playing around in a similar category of changes, I also scrolled down the list of in-game items and experiment with trying to add some new ones myself. Turns out, there still was some new graphics making energy in me after all. Rolling over to the probably expected technical aspect of reviewing the ROM's trainer battles, I revamp or improve any teams that lack moves, have weird builds, or are needlessly weak with things like almost no IVs in general. But of course, that also includes me adding a handful of my own custom trainers across the game wherever it feels the most necessary. Remembering that the game is probably older than a good chunk of people watching, I go and give adding fairy type into the game a shot, which eventually somehow works out in the end. Of course, that still means that I need to go back and make Pokemon and moves that fit the theme be fairy type now too. But now that we got the less visually pleasing, yet still interesting side of the ROM covered, let's close out the video with the best Vega Fakemon remakes that I saved for last. When it comes to Vega, Machu is one of those designs that you have seen, yet never knew what its origins were. Pretty much something similar to Mewfree and Chaos Black in other words. Though, since we got that now cleared up, let's see what's under the hood for this muscle mountain. Besides the justified glazing that a Vega fandom page does, Machu is obtained by evolving Pikachu once again with even more friendship. Hooray! Anyways, you would think that at first sight that the stats are pretty good for what it is, only to realize that Raichu still outranks it by a 10-point bigger total. I guess 130 attack doesn't come without sacrifice. Putting the page's memeing and off-guard catching Pokédex entry aside, there isn't really that much left to look at, so it looks like we'll need to get a bit creative. Since Machu is pretty much known for the sake of it being unreasonably beefed up, the only real correct option for redesigning it would be doing it in the style of a similar meme, the ripped starter figures. Beefing the already beefed fella to extreme proportions, the majority of the time goes into sculpting this godly creature's muscles, thighs, abs, and everything else. Adding shading to this sprite like no other before, I take advantage of Pikachu's small color pool to add more shades of yellow into the mix and go further beyond. But, of course, what would be the point of making a beefcake if we didn't make it flakes after making the time to animate it? But most important of all is to see the final result and all the gains in the GBA format itself, not shying away from also seeing the back and icon too. The shiny, being a tanned version of Machu just seemed so simple, yet perfect not to do. But even better is... Now, keep your socks on. There's actually one more design left, and of course, it will be the best. Just like any old Pokemon journey, there's a special Pokemon that awaits you at the end. So, continuing the tradition for the series once again, The last one left is a legendary, which also doubles as the mascot for the ROM hack in this case too. Nemea is a steel type, which is the leader of the Meteoric Legends legendary trio, like you could expect with its appearance as a legendary and the one that's featured in the title screen, the majority of plot and events in the game, while also the explanation for the Fakemon themselves, all happens with Nemea being in the center for all of it. Having a bit smaller, still somewhat impressive stat total to back its reputation up. The deck's entry states its horn as the main source of its power. To be honest, the current horn doesn't seem like the most fierce part of design, so let's be sure to keep that in mind for later. Digging a bit deeper, or in this case scrolling down more, Nemea is mostly based on Greek mythology's Nemean lion. Well, I think that's good enough for me to get started on a new design. Instantly going for an upgraded horn like I mentioned, I follow that up with a more fierce pose. Then draw the rest of the body with a higher tier lion physique in mind and make the mane more defined. Having some fun with actually needing to worry about the palette size restrictions for once, I play around with which colors I want to use and how they complement each other. Eventually, despite the design's scaled-up complexity compared to the previous ones, the finished sprite comes together faster than you can say eeny, meeny, miny, moe. Finally getting our hands on the reshaped legendary in the game, all perspectives seem quite good to me. What do you think? But before you come to a full conclusion, we can't forget about the other sprites too. For the shiny, I decided to give it a more metallic, cosmic look to reflect its typing better and be more fitting for a Meteoric Legend trio leader role. But that's without saying that this is cooler.
And that was my attempt at giving a fresh coat of paint to some of the community's most known creations. Let me know which ROM remake result you enjoyed the most, while also feel free to leave your critiques down below. Besides thanking the real stars behind this channel, I invite the cool people only to check out my Twitter and stay tuned for more videos like this.